Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this new panel session about Open RAN and 5G technologies. It is my pleasure to moderate this session. We have great experts from different sectors and will give us some different insights on the importance of Open RAN and 5G for African society. So in this panel, we are going to discuss about the adoption of 5G networks across Africa and the value of Open RAN technologies. There is a growing interest on Open RAN and 5G. Both are existing solutions, and we will hear about how they are commercially available, and they both can transform society and the way that we understand how wireless networks are currently working. So without any further introduction, I would like to give the floor to each one of the panelists so they can give us some opening remarks, and then we will go into the questions that we have prepared for them. So let's start first with Mr. Sahib Gadiali. He is Senior Director, Technology and Innovation Strategy at Parallel Wireless. Welcome, Sahib.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. So I'm Sahib Gadiali, and I'm with Parallel Wireless doing technology and innovation strategy. And I'm a die-hard technologist. So you can probably see from my tie, I don't know if it's visible, but it's called All the Generations. And it's also got Open RAN on it. So you will hear a lot of interesting things from me during the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahid. I'm sure we will hear very interesting insights. And also we have an expert that is Mrs. Elizabeth Mikwala, Vice President, International Government Affairs at Qualcomm International Incorporated. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Martha. And yes, give me an opportunity to say thank you very much to ESTDA for giving Qualcomm an opportunity to speak on a subject that is central to the company's business. So in the next 3 minutes, I just would like to give you some perspectives on the subject of 5G from where we sit. And I start by saying that 5G will be the key ingredient of the digital economy. And why do we say this? Well, with every generation of wireless, there is always a problem to be solved. If you recall, in the beginning, it was about everyone on the planet having a wireless phone. That was 2G. When we went to 3G, it was about getting data on those devices. And that's when we saw the advent of messaging and email. With 4G, it was about bringing the broadband data to the device. And that was the smartphone era. Now, this 5th generation, we see a paradigm shift because 5G has been designed to connect everything to the cloud 100% of the time in a reliable manner. So one important aspect of 5G, and we call it IMT 2020 interchangeably, compared to other generations, is the prominent role of a diverse set of usage scenarios, with applications beyond the traditional high-speed connection. So even though enhanced broadband, mobile broadband is still really important with its multi-gigabit peak speeds, really it is the diversity of the other services enabled by the two different capabilities. For instance, applications, for instance, just to give ultra low energy, okay, ultra low complexity, ultra high density, which are all attributes of massive machine type communications in 5G. Then you have ultra reliable, low latency communications, which gives you strong security, ultra high reliability, low latency, and extreme mobility. It is these attributes that can be leveraged by local innovators in Africa to tackle needs such as remote healthcare for urban and rural areas, enabling business opportunities in rural areas, rural last mile connectivity with fixed wireless access, smart agriculture, virtual classes in urban and rural areas, while also enabling capacity crunches at airports, etc. So there are two prerequisites that bring these capabilities to the market or to us. And one of them obviously is the spectrum debate, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But perhaps more important is that introduction of all these capabilities in countries or in regions is the existence of enabling policies and regulations. In all the countries and regions, and there are more than 95 operators in 40 countries, the one thing that has enabled it is a deliberate procedure to bring into play rules and regulations, licensing policies that enable the technologies. So in our view, in Africa, it is going to be the same until and unless all stakeholders sit together and we come up with a harmonized approach, maybe a harmonized continental strategy as a catalyst. As you know, 5G has not taken off in Africa. It's going to take that kind of catalytic activity. And in this workshop, where all stakeholders are present, we have policymakers, we have regulators, we have equipment manufacturers, we have operators, users. We would like to bring it to this workshop to start discussing what those enabling policies and regulations may look like, so that 5G does play the role that we hope it will play on the continent. And I'll stop there as my introduction.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. For sure, we are going to address some of those challenges in terms of harmonization and adoption of regional policies that will promote these technologies. So now let's hear from our next speaker, Mr. Ben Roberts. He's the Group Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at Liquid Intelligent Technologies. Welcome, Ben.
Hi there. My name is Ben. I'm with Liquid Telecom or Liquid Intelligent Technologies. I'm sorry, we recently changed our name. I keep saying it wrong. I think the sort of questions of 5G and why we've not seen it being adopted very much in Africa. There's a lot of aspects to this, and I think certainly an area around devices is going to be part of the discussion. But for us, we're largely investing in when it comes to infrastructure, we're largely investing in fiber optic cable, which is a very important part of any 5G network, and a lot of wires needed in wireless networks of the future. And we're also investing largely in data centers. So again, carry neutral data centers where multiple operators can be, co-located is coming into a lot of the aspects of, 5G and interconnection and sharing of resources and core. I'm quite interested in how, we might see a new generation rather than just existing operators upgrading from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5G, which isn't very transformative. For me, I'm interested in how we might see, following on from the last panel, new and emerging smaller operators and wireless ISPs and things adopting some of these technologies. And I think this comes into play with the stuff around Open RAN. I'm very interested to hear about how innovation might happen in Africa, not just on the application side, like Elizabeth mentioned, but actually in whether we might get actual vendors of technology in Africa using some of these things like Open RAN. So looking forward to the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ben, for bringing that. So we are bringing the complete chain, including fiber and wireless, and also bringing the complete ecosystem that is very relevant in Africa for many stakeholders. And on that direction, I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Morenikeji Anie. He's the founder and CEO of Hotspot Network Limited, and he is exactly one of those important stakeholders that understands the local context and that has been working on wireless networks for a while. So welcome, Mr. Morenikeji.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me around. I want to thank USCDA for what they've been doing. And we are part of the people that have just been given a grant for feasibility study on rural telephony. My name is Monroe. I'm the CEO of Ospo Network Limited. And we are into rural connectivity. That means we provide voice and data, 3G, 4G, hoping to migrate to 5G for rural communities. And luckily, at the advent of Open RAN, it was actually tested on the rural areas. And we are actually deploying Open RAN technology now in rural areas. So we're very enthusiastic of digital inclusion, whereby our solutions can bring to bear a good healthcare system in rural areas, connectivity for smart farming. We have a lot of programs around rural digital economy, whereby youth, women can be empowered in rural areas, and so that we can bring them into the economic space. And our plan is to, in the next 3 years, to have about 5 million subscribers in rural areas, whereby we can actually decongest the urban centers, where people can actually live in rural areas and be very comfortable, digital-wise, and be part of growth in the world.
Thank you very much. And yeah, that's also bringing another element of this discussion on the importance of bridging the digital gap and connecting rural communities. So I will introduce our last speaker for the session today, Mr. Greg Monroe, and he's Director of Product Development for Africa at American Tower Corporation. So welcome, Greg.
Martha, thanks very much. Great to be on the panel, and it's great to be a part of this exciting topic. I think yeah, just to pick up, I think on what a lot of the panelists have already chatted about is, you know, we're very excited about 5G and Open RAN. I think it's important to note that Open RAN isn't 5G and not necessarily vice versa, but the ones that enable it to the other. But also what I think is quite incredible is I almost feel like we've seen this journey 10 years ago when we saw the move to cloud. So, you know, I remember quite distinctly when we're having discussions with banks about moving infrastructure to the cloud, and I think the benefits, the commercial benefits were clear, but there was a lot of reluctance to take it on and put core banking applications and infrastructure. And you know, if you go and now look 11 years later, most CIOs are running CRM and ERP systems in the cloud in some way or other. And in fact, banking is facing one of the biggest disruptors that it's seen in many centuries, which is cryptocurrencies and the like, which is a whole separate conversation. But I think for us, you know, certainly on the African continent, and I'll come back to that in a second. You know, there's three things, and I think Ben touched on it. It's just, you know, we're seeing infrastructure starting to mature as an enabler. I think, you know, it's both an opportunity and a headwind. So, you know, the prolific rollout of fiber and having the data center infrastructure, there's massive amounts being built, but we need to get that accelerated. I think the second thing is, you know, roughly 70% of all tower infrastructure is still backhauled via microwave. So a huge opportunity there to still get high-speed connectivity to the towers, because the tower is only as good as its backhaul, no matter what you're broadcasting from that tower. And then I think in many of our markets that we operate in across the continent, and in a national long-distance, fiber is still exorbitantly prohibitive in terms of cost. So, you know, getting fiber services to outlying metro areas is still quite expensive. And then I think Ben touched on it. You know, the economies of scale is a challenge. Less than 1% of our handsets on the continent are 5G enabled. And even if we did have everyone with 5G headsets, still, you know, our revenue per subscribers is relatively low. So monetizing those networks, we've got to figure out those models that Elizabeth talked about, you know, in terms of monetizing it. And then I think from a regulatory perspective, that's also going to be a key point of discussion, you know, that we're seeing technology on a different trajectory to policy. And so how do we work with, you know, between public and private sector? So, you know, the regulators can lean on private sector to help form partnerships and get these policies made that enables Open RAN and 5G network sharing and all sorts of really interesting thing that'll lower those price points. So yeah, that's it in a quick summary from my side. But thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Greg, and very exciting. So you have seen already what will be the colors and flavors of this panel. So let's start now with a basic question, I think, just to settle the scene. I would like to ask Sahib to explain all the participants and all those that are attending this panel. Can you please explain in 3 minutes what Open RAN is and which are the advantages, like for dummies?
Yeah,
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So, in the most simplest way, Open RAN basically means open interfaces, right? And I'll just explain it with an example. So I got some building blocks or Lego blocks, whatever you might say. And let's say if this is a network, right? So this is a network today, and this is a closed network. So now when you want to upgrade it, you have to basically, so this is a red network, right? So you have to get more red bricks, right? And you have to, enhance it or whatever, modify it by this. So because this is closed, like a, closed network, right? And the same would go basically true if suppose, it's basically green, you just, upgrade it or enhance it or modify it with green, right? And if I just, for the sake of completion, I also got a blue. So this is a closed system. When you have open interfaces. So you can actually do a mix and match, right? And I thought I'll just get a slightly multicolored, bricks to basically explain this. So you have different components from different vendors. And, so let's say a network basically has rolled this out. And for some reason, they are not happy with one of the vendors. So they say like, you know what, actually, we are not happy with you guys. So we are going to replace you. So when they are being replaced, you can actually replace them by anybody, right? So you can go to a completely new vendor. You can get like a, new software, you can get new hardware, because this is all open. This is all interchangeable. And generally, along with Open RAN, you use another term called vRAN or virtualized RAN. And what it means is, because they are used so interchangeably, what it really means is we don't really have to have hardware. We can generally replace a lot of hardware which used to be in the network with software. So you really just need hardware for the likes of things like, in the end, when you have RF, right? You have the antennas, you have the radio heads. That's exactly where you have the hardware. Everything else can become software, which can run on like COTS servers. And COTS stands for commercial off the shelf. So something which, you can buy on Amazon, or you can buy it from a server partner, or you can even containerize it. So you can move the software into cloud. So the cloud basically is connecting to the RF at the end, right? But the challenge with that is you need a lot of fiber, because these things have so much data that is sent. You need fiber in the last mile, what we say. So this is in brief Open RAN. So and I hope it basically explains what Open RAN really means. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahib. Very clear, and I'm glad you took exactly the time to explain so we can just set the scene. And now I think it's time to start discussing about the challenges. So I think it's clear for us the benefit that we could get from Open RAN, and Elizabeth also at the beginning was explaining the benefits of 5G. So now I will start the discussion about the regulatory conditions and the policies that would facilitate the adoption of these technologies. So maybe, Elizabeth, if I may come back to you on that, can you please let us know which do you think are the key enablers in terms of policy and regulations that could facilitate the adoption of these technologies?
Yes, thanks very much, Martha. And even just listening to my co-panelists, this could be a long conversation. But the first thing I do want to say is that the advent of 5G takes the whole conversation of regulatory and policy beyond the ICT sector. Because the previous Gs just dealt with, like Ben said, it was more you were talking about how you enable operators to operate, okay, give them licenses. But what we are talking about now goes beyond the sector and goes beyond just the players we have always known. So we talk about handsets, etc., because we think about another handset that is going to enable us to communicate the way we do. But actually 5G goes beyond that. Think about enabling massive Internet of Things. Think about enabling verticals. Does a port authority need to have his services provided to him, or can the port authority itself be licensed to transact? Does a school campus? So when you start talking about education, the sectors that 5G should change are education. When you start talking about education, when you start talking about health, when you start talking about transportation, then you see that the kind of regulations that we have today, where we license operators, frequencies, etc., needs to change. So the first conversation that we need to have with policymakers is, what will enable every user to access whatever resources they need to implement networks? So it's about even spectrum, for instance. Are we reaching a situation where there can be different spectrum holders other than the traditional ones we know? Okay, who is now a licensee? It is those conversations we need to have that will make the difference. Now we talk about backhaul. Of course, 5G in and of itself, you need to be able to access, sites, okay, enabling the rollout of 5G, but also access to the other adjacent providers. So those are the kinds of things that we need to talk about in country, but I think in Africa, a harmonized approach across the continent, if we're going to reach the economies of scale that we're talking about.
Excellent elements. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And I really like this idea of going beyond just the ICT sector and having a lot of applications, and also going beyond the traditional model. So that's really exciting to hear. I wonder if the other speakers would like to also refer to some recommendations in terms of regulations and policies.
So if I can just very quickly add, it's just so along with the spectrum, so you also need a lot of spectrum, and that is actually very important. So if you really want to provide the benefits of 5G, you need a lot of spectrum, and spectrum in the mid band, spectrum in the low band, right? Because generally a lot of times you hear millimeter wave with 5G, but millimeter wave is great for like very dense areas. So like maybe in the downtown or in the the city center kind of thing. But otherwise you need lower spectrum and a lot of it. And the second thing is unlicensed spectrum. So you would have noticed that a lot of countries have now started giving like a big chunk of unlicensed spectrum, which could be used for a lot of services. So like, the private networks kind of thing. So I think, more countries need to actually provide a lot of private, this unlicensed spectrum, and 6 gigahertz is a fantastic band because, so either you make it like a neutral. So, right now it's being opened up for Wi-Fi, but if it's made neutral, then you can even use it for other cellular services. So yeah, two things from me, a lot more spectrum and unlicensed spectrum. Thank you.
Thank you, Sahib. And I saw Ben also raise his hand.
Yeah, look, I'm seeing Zahid's Lego blocks, which is really nice. I think it makes me think an area of it's quite a pain, really, is this concept of type approval. And, we see across the whole continent, regulators hanging on to perhaps outdated principles of type approval, and any new piece of equipment that you want to bring into a particular country, then is this type approved? And all they're really asking, have you got have you got, has this been tested by FCC, European Commission or something else? They're not really doing any testing. They're not actually adding any value to anything. So as we look into more this Open RAN approach, where you're looking at a lot of different options for interoperability, all that has to be backed up for an operator by actually having done interoperability tests. And that's going to require interoperability labs. Now, when we're buying everything from the red vendor or the green vendor in the first thing, we don't necessarily need to worry about that as an operator, because that red vendor is giving us an SLA. We're having a contract that red block of bricks is going to work. That is our SLA contract with the red vendor. Same with the green vendor. If we are going for the multicolored last option, we don't have one throat to choke in terms of the SLA with the vendors. So that's going to require more interoperability testing and operators to do a bit more of that. Very few operators in Africa have their own development R&D labs, interoperability labs. So I think, we're probably going to have to think beyond outdated things of this type of approval, which is more of a gatekeeping to importation, and actually think about, investment in labs where these can be tested, where vendors can come and bring their stuff, or operators can come and bring their stuff, and the other colored blocks are in the lab. If we're thinking about buying a particular base station from the pink vendor and we want to see if it works with the green vendor and the purple vendor core, we would need to be able to see that in the lab. And that's very expensive for us. I think that's a key piece of the success of, from a policy-wide, the success of what Open RAN can be. Yeah?
Thank you, Ben. And I think that becomes relevant related to the fact that we are having more and more IoT devices. So I think that becomes, I don't know if someone else would like to refer to this last comment from Ben.
Can I just jump in? Because just so that we don't confuse. So I think the IoT Ben refers to is the interoperability testing. And, this one neck to choke is a very common misunderstanding, right? When you go and buy your Wi-Fi router, do you think about, well, will it work in my house? No, right? Here, I'll just go and see whether how much money I want to spend or what kind of a technology I want. And Open RAN basically is going to make it like that. We have over 50 networks, Open RAN networks worldwide, and we never have seen these problems. So in the end, from an operator point of view, the neck to choke is the one who they give the contract, right? And basically, it all depends. Some operators, they want to have their own lab. They want to assemble these different Lego bricks themselves. That's great. Some operators say, we want Lego bricks, colored and multicolored Lego bricks, but you do it. And if something goes wrong, we will basically catch you. So there are different models, and different requirements. I think we should be open to this approach. Basically, we shouldn't think it's going to be so difficult. So, but, so I thought, let me just put this out. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Sahib. And I come back to the first scope of the question is let's think about the challenges that regulators should take into account for their policies. Yeah. And I guess the point here is we need to make sure that type approval is correctly implemented, so we'll facilitate the deployments. And thank you very much for clarifying, because that is a common confusion. Okay, so I would like, Elizabeth, do you want to say something? I see your face.
Please, can I just say something in case something I said was misleading? I think we really have to be careful. The word standards is so important. So when we talk 5G standard, as far as Africa is concerned, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, is IMT 2020 standard as done by the ITU. So interoperability becomes a given. And then when we talk about Open RAN, it is in the 5G scenario, it's an implementation of that standard using different technologies. I think that's really important. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you. And there are different levels then of understanding of what we understand by every different layer. So thank you. And I would like now to turn to those stakeholders that have more experience of the deployments and the local context. So I would like to hear from you and about the different challenges that you face when you are really rolling out these networks. And so probably we can start by Morenike. strategy. If you could please let us know what infrastructure is needed, which are the main challenges when you want to really bring these networks to a reality and for implementation in the different African countries.
Okay, thank you very much. When it comes to Open RAN technologies, we require a lot of like 5G technology now. You might need to build a lot of towers. That means you'll be looking at a lot of small cells that requires specialized towers. That means you need to build more towers, and that has to be deployed. You need lamp poles because we are looking at street level deployment. Now you have to look at many of indoor solutions, distributed antenna systems, and you have to look at high traffic areas whereby you need to deploy so many small cells. So that requires a lot of transmission. So you have to be very strategic very innovative in your transmission, backhauling. So you have to use a lot of fiber, a lot of millimeter microwaves, so that it could be, because there's going to be high throughput, there are more high bandwidth. Now you need to be very careful too you need a lot of power solutions. You can't rely on grids, so you have to look for specialized battery banks that can be very effective. That will make sure that you have continuous connections. So those are the challenges that you need to have while you are trying to deploy 5G technologies. And I think those challenges are being worked around, and you have to do a lot of software driven. Software driven. The planning is software driven. It's not the usual 2G deployment that requires a lot of radio planning. And these ones are software driven, and the upgrades are actually done software. So you have to be your planners have to be more on software end rather than on the on the field. So those are the challenges that comes with Open RAN technologies, and I think so far it's not really deployed in Africa because there's so many people that are using 2G, 3G. So I think for 5G, Open RAN is just an enabler for 5G deployment. So far we still have a lot of people on 2G, 3G, and the Open RAN is coming in to be able to merge all those Gs together and make it fully functional, so that anybody that's on 2G, anybody that's on 3G can actually effectively migrate to 4G and 5G. Those are the challenges we are having. You need to deploy more towers. You need to specialize in your transmission. You need your radio plan to be software driven. Optimization has to be software driven. Upgrades has to be software driven. So everything is embedded on software. So the training has to be different from the usual training. So we're still on it. There's still so many trainings to be done, and we're still at a very formative stage. But we're getting better anyway. Thank you.
Thank you more. And you mentioned fiber and towers, and we have two experts here on the two subjects. So I would like to give the floor probably to Ben first. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, they come hand in hand, and I think it's the challenges for people building networks is in having access to those. If you're a new operator and you've got to build your own towers, it's an enormous lump of capex. So this is why we've seen independent fiber operators like ourselves or government. In some countries, governments have intervened and built fiber optic backbones. We've seen obviously tower codes emerging from the spin-off operators selling off their assets. But it's a bit unfortunate. Maybe we see a country like Ethiopia, which has gone through a process of opening up for the first time in a very long time, opening up new licenses. And I think an industry, the tower companies and fiber companies, we perhaps expected and hoped that independent licenses would be awarded for those types of things to be done separately. These are policy aspects. If countries are opening up, it helps if neutral infrastructure can be built to suit at day one. And I think, I mean, Greg may have some thoughts on this, but I also see, scope for more partnerships and between, partnerships between towercos and fibercos emerging. And I look at the UK and companies. There's been some consolidation maybe in the early 2000s, but you saw that some backbone networks and towercos and fibercos working together, eventually merging as well. So you see a little bit some consolidation, but there's also room for partnerships between towercos and fibercos. And I think we're looking at how we provide a lot of bandwidth to a lot of mobile operators and to ISPs, and we're looking at how can we be more than just a bandwidth supplier. How can we be a one-stop shop for helping emerging bandwidth providers like Moenikeji's operations. Hope I said that right. Sorry. I think partnering with telcos is a good scope for, a good place to start, I think.
Yeah. So partners, let me take that word and let me come. Go ahead, Greg.
Great. No, just absolutely echo what Ben says. I mean, if you just look at telcos globally, I mean, there's significant investment from them going into fiber in pretty much every single market. But in my mind, I think it also comes back to the regulatory landscape around that infrastructure ownership. Who's allowed to control and own active infrastructure, not necessarily the spectrum. But if we're really serious about driving down the cost of delivery, both for the MNOs and for the end users, we really got to start to think about that the regulatory landscape very differently in terms of how that infrastructure is delivered to the MNOs to basically put their spectrum on top and service their clients. And that goes right back to whether you're talking about millimeter wave and doing densified networks in metros, securing rights of ways. How do you do that effectively and quickly to put up a street pole with an antenna on the top and then get the fiber backhaul in? And then also in the rural space, do we need a very different regulatory framework for spectrum and deployments of infrastructure? Because the cost and the commercial models, and Morokenji will know better than anybody, is fundamentally different than deploying a tower in a metro area. So, I think when in terms of those deployments, it has to start at the regulatory policy, and the regulators working with the private sector, partnering well and figuring out how to do it. And I think it's key that not, you can't have a one shoe fits all. What does the metro look like? What does it look like in peri-urban? What does it look like in urban? And what does it look like in ultra-urban? And what are the right cost structures that are going to allow infrastructure providers and MNOs to deliver a quality service to the folks at the end of the day?
Yeah, thank you very much, Greg, for bringing that. I think that it would also require flexibility in the regulations to understand that the same conditions cannot be applied for everyone, especially for rural areas. So thank you for that. There is a question from the audience. Could you please expound upon the opportunities for local technology firms to get involved with local telecom network implementations? So I would like to hear your perspective, Sahid and Ben. Maybe let's start by Sahid.
Yeah, so I think I should have actually, when I talked about Open RAN, I should have explained a bit more. So, with if I bring my my multicolored Lego block back, each of these colors you are seeing, so when we talk about software, especially for Open RAN, right? And as I said, we are moving into software. So when we are doing everything virtualized, these could all be designed by different companies. So there are, if we just take in a very simple terms, hardware and software, generally you have areas which are specialized in hardware. So, we are talking about the likes of Japan or South Korea or China or Taiwan, right? they are so advanced, it's difficult to actually catch up to them. A lot of countries are actually trying. So, by saying like, oh, you should have some kind of a hardware, fab or, a chip design happening locally, right? And you can do it in countries like US, but software is actually easy. So like, when I say like this part, right, in the network, if it's all software, this one could be designed in South Africa, right? So, this one could have been designed in Nigeria, and, I'm just giving an example. And this one could be actually designed in the UK. And this is what you see. So I'm based in the UK, and you see UK government is very interested in Open RAN because they realize that, it's not easy to catch up with the traditional RAN vendors because everything is closed, and, they sort of don't like mix and match. But if you adopt Open RAN, you can have different parts of Open RAN being designed by different companies. So there are a lot of initiatives here. There are a lot of competitions going on here. And the same thing will actually be beneficial for, different African countries. So the Open RAN, you have the ORAN Alliance. They create different kinds of standards for different interfaces. There is a management plane, control plane. And these local firms, they can actually start by, saying like, okay, we are going to become expert in this one small area, and then we are going to actually, build on it. And, if you can actually partner with the operators locally, or if operators can actually say like, look, you know what, we want to do an open network, but also get, local companies come in. This will actually be a great initiative, so it will be a win-win situation for everyone, really.
Okay. Thank you, Sahib. And Ben, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think, expanding on that, the traditional vendors that are being used by most operators in Africa, they're some of the largest vendors in the world, and and the whatever problem they're trying to solve, the big vendors generally are trying to solve the problems of their big customers. So the big customers of the big vendors is going to be your AT&Ts, your China Mobiles, your NTTs, Telefonicas. This is ultimately the operators in the world that the big vendors are trying to solve the problem because they're their big customers. Now, we as operators in Africa, we don't have the same problems as NTT and AT&T. We have some common problems, but we have a lot of different problems. We also have a lot of what I would call unique African challenges, and there are many of them. And from people using manholes to light fires to keep warm, to elephants treading on fiber. I've talked about these things many times, but so there's definitely an opportunity, as Zahid says, for vendors to develop solutions that are there to solve the business model issues of rural. We need ultra cheap things to solve connectivity in rural areas because we're looking at low ARPUs and everything else. We've got business challenges, and this requires ultra low power, ultra low cost that really isn't being solved by many vendors across the world. And with scope for breaking down these things into smaller Lego blocks, and as Zahid has demonstrated, there's an opportunity for small vendors to emerge and develop something. And in a previous life, I worked for Ericsson in the previous life, but the company I worked for in Ericsson was a very small company that in UK, which had been developed by a guy on his kitchen table, and he developed a satellite radio paging system distribution, and he sold it to one operator in the UK and then another. And then after he sold about 5 customers, Ericsson came and bought the company and put it into their radio paging system at the time. So there's opportunities for really small technology companies to develop these Lego blocks to then have really good exit strategies to be absorbed by bigger operators, having solved problems. And I think this is the kind of African innovation we want to see. We'd like to see this happening, and anything that can create this opportunity, whether it be the manufacturing of this off-the-shelf hardware that I had mentioned, or whether it's in software. That's I think can be a big piece of the future for African telecoms.
Okay, thank you, Ben. And I hope the person that asked the question from the audience got very good insights. And now let me address something that you have all mentioned somehow, but I think it's really relevant for Africa. And not only for Africa, indeed, it's like for many countries in the world, and it's that divide that we still have. I mean, the fact that many people are still not getting connectivity and would like to probably get all those benefits of digital inclusion if they have access to connectivity. So let me ask you, in an open way, how will 5G and Open RAN contribute to bridge the digital divide in Africa?
So I can start if you want. So even though we are talking mostly about 5G, right? 5G is as good as the amount of spectrum available for 5G. So a lot of operators, if you see in the different parts of the world, they do something which sometimes I bluntly say as the fake 5G. So they will show you a 5G icon, but because they do not have the spectrum or enough spectrum, they just reuse some of the existing spectrum. So by something called the dynamic spectrum sharing. Okay, you want to do proper 5G, high-speed 5G, you need a lot of spectrum. And I think if the regulators in different countries, they can facilitate a lot of spectrum, it's very useful. But then again, not just for 5G. So you can have a good chunk of spectrum for 4G, and 4G can give you speeds like up to 500 Mbps easily. So 500 megabits per second, right? So in a lot of cases, those speeds are good enough. But then again, the spectrum is not good enough. You also need a fantastic backhaul. So, if you have a microwave backhaul, but that can only do like, I don't know, maybe 100, 200 Mbps, then that's not good enough. So you need fiber. But these are all long-term things, it won't suddenly happen. We need to just start preparing for it now. Thanks.
Thank you, Sahib. Elizabeth, and then more.
Yes,
Elizabeth?
I'd like to just bring forth some consideration. And this is what I want to say. 5G as a technology, as a standard, is able to address a lot of capabilities and needs. So it's not so much what can the technology do, it can do. But like Zaid has just said, it's the combination of the capability and the spectrum and the policy that creates the solution. For instance, we talk about the digital divide in Africa. I don't know what that means. Okay, so I think at some point we need to go to the actual need we want to serve. Do we want to serve education? Does 5G lend itself to education? What do we need to make it possible for 5G to address the use case? So I think, to me, the technology exists. It's being deployed. Okay, the need exists. What do we need to superimpose? The technology, the policy, the regulatory environment to make the solution work. So I think, for me, let's not talk general. Let's address specific needs and see if we cannot find a solution using the technology.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think More want to say something also.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. When we're talking of digital inclusion, most especially the rural areas, we have to be a bit very careful because for Africa, 5G is still at a very formative stage, and we have very few phones that have 5G capabilities. So for us to be able to deploy and have digital inclusion for rural areas, we have to start looking at the Open RAN we're talking about is just an enabler 5G easy deployment. Okay. So once you have an Open RAN, it's very easy for you to merge all the Gs from the 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G. Now, Open RAN is being deployed in rural areas whereby you can have users or 2G, 3G phones can still have access to the network. Then we are deploying 3G, 4G. Now, we have more phones that have these capabilities than 5G, and it's still easier to deploy. So the focus is for us to make Open RAN very effective and set up that platform on migration to 5G, which is going to be easy. Now to deploy, because when you are deploying 2G, the legacy 2G network, you are moving to 3G, 4G. That means you have to start cannibalizing your network. But with Open RAN, you don't need to cannibalize. We have a single box and everything keeps running. So for us, we are trying to deepen digital inclusion here. We are trying to see how the rural dwellers can have access to cost-effective connectivity, your voice and data effectively on your phone. Then it sets a tone for IoTs, digital farming. Women can have access to good health facilities via the mobile connectivity. In such a way, the youth, the women can be empowered. And for us, we are trying to do some activities in our areas. Once we see that there's so much activity in the rural areas, we try to see what is galvanizing those activities. What are the other things can be, energized in terms of rural digital economy. So in such a way, we are trying to deepen the digital inclusion in those areas. We are talking, obviously, the COVID has brought in a lot of things into space where there are limitations to movement. Now, the limitation to movement means you have to stay in a place for a very long time. Yeah, how do you connect to the external world? You have to use your phone. You have to be on your laptops. Now, during the COVID, some of these areas were cut off. So how do you expect them to live? So our most important thing we're trying to do now is how to fast track the deployment of voice and data in those areas so that they can be brought into the space of this digital space, whereby students can have access to education online, health center can have access to education. Then farmers can be in an ecosystem whereby they can have access through a platform, have access to loans, have access to information about farming, weather systems. So it's all inclusive. Our own idea is we are trying to create a program around the rural areas whereby it rides on technology, and this can drive digital economy. So the 5G you're talking about, Open RAN is just an enabler to 5G. We still need to make sure that 3G and 4G are working effectively before we now migrate to 5G. I think we still have a long way to go. Thank you.
Martha, I think
great insights. Go ahead, Greg, please.
Yeah, just very briefly. I totally agree, and I think for me the Open RAN is going to enable different commercial and business models. I think at the end of the day, it's a technology, but the fact that it's flexible, the fact that it's going to lower total cost of ownership, ease of deployments. I think we're going to see business models coming out of Open RAN deployments that we haven't even anticipated yet. And that for me is what's exciting, because then, the specific use cases that Elizabeth spoke about, how do we target, e-health by way of an example, or education, becomes a lot easier. But it's going to be about transforming business models using Open RAN.
And may I ask you something very quickly? What you're referring to, I guess when we refer to the closing the gap, it's also because, what do you think in Africa context? Do we need more competition and investment? How can these problems be targeted by these solutions?
Martha, posing that to me specifically?
Like a follow-up of your comment, and if anyone else would like something.
Yeah. So I think it's a number of things. And I think everyone's alluded to the same thing. I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think it's a combination of using the technology, getting the right regulatory framework in place, and then adapting the commercial models to suit. I think mobile money is a great example of seeing the benefits of the technology used to service banking to everybody. So I suspect it starts with, and I'm sounding a bit like a broken record, but it starts with getting the right regulatory framework and lowering those barriers to entry. and making sure that it's a horses for courses. And I think the rest will fall into place very, very quickly. But it's got to be commercially viable, I think, for everybody involved, and it's got to be practically usable for the folks at the other end of the phone. And if we can get all that right, I think we can really start to make huge strides in closing the divide. And I think there's a lot of programs that are making big progress in doing that, but we can still do a lot more.
Okay, thank you, Greg. And we have another question from the audience to Maureen Keji. What is the impact of 5G on the overall cost of infrastructure, since 5G requires more cells, towers, power support, and backhaul links?
Yes, thank you very much. You see, benefits of Open RAN are two of the biggest challenge the network face today is the cost to deploy and cost to maintain the network due to vendor lock-in and the network complexity. Now, for you to be able to support 2G, 3G, and 4G and eventually get ready for 5G, these challenges are apparent in low ARPU markets like rural areas. Now, Open RAN will reduce the total cost of your deployment because you are now using a box for everything you are doing. What separates you is the software. Now, the total cost of deployment of Open RAN and to the other legacy networks is quite enormous. The legacy, like Sahib said, for the legacy, you have to keep having so many vendors A, vendors B. That requires a lot of boxes of different, they are proprietaries. Now, with Open RAN, you have just a single box in all the stuffs, and you have softwares riding over that box. So definitely, the cost is less for Open RAN. And like I said, Open RAN is just an enabler for 5G. So the cost we should be looking at is cost of Open RAN that leads us to 5G, because the Open RAN will make all your Gs, like 2G, 3G, 4G, to be one, so that they can talk to each other effectively.
Okay, thank you, More. So we are just at the end of this panel. Unfortunately, I will give each one of the speakers at the moment to say a final sentence. What do you think is your final closing remarks? Just one sentence, please. And I will start by the order of the screen. So, Ben.
Thanks. Yeah, look, I mean, back to the sort of even the last question about whether 5G will reduce the digital divide. 5G might increase the digital divide, I think would be my parting comment, especially while, I have one of these, right? It's a phone, but it's not the only digital device I have. I have many digital devices. But for those people who, this is their only digital device, or this is the device that they can borrow from their parents sometimes to get their school lessons if their parents aren't using it. If that's the only access to devices we have, then the digital divide is going to get wider. And unless we address the device question and device availability and affordability and equity on devices, we are not going to transform anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Now, Sahib.
Yeah, so I would basically just say, especially for the audience, right? There is a lot of discussion and debate about Open RAN. But from the operator's point of view, they just have to actually try it. And they will realize that it's not as complex as they might have heard, or, not that much of an issue. And you can use the same approach for different generations, right? Going all the way from 2G to 5G. So software running on a COT server, you just need to connect the RF at the end. So that's about it. Thanks.
Okay, More?
Thank you very much. I have very few words. For us to increase our digital inclusion, we have to focus more on the rural areas. That is where to go to. That's where the youths are. That's where the women are. And that's where we need to empower the people. For us to take people out of poverty, we need to look into areas of rural areas. And that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, just nothing more than just very, very excited about the opportunity. I think we're seeing another technology wave that's going to be disruptive, and just very excited to be part of it.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Yes, in order for all of us in Africa to reap the benefits that the technology of 5G promises, we must have an intra-regional, multi-stakeholder, multi-sector conversation to convert the technology into reality. And I think that starts now. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So let's pass from vision to reality. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much to all the speakers. And I invite you to follow the last session of the day after this one. So thank you very much, STDA, for this invite. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.